The stars had always called to humanity, and humanity had answered that call 300 years ago in silence. Elena Vasquez stood at the observation window of Station Omega 7, a massive structure hidden in the cold darkness beyond Neptune, and she watched the data streams flowing across her screens with the patience of someone who had spent her entire life preparing for a moment that might never come. She was 52 years old, born on this very station, trained from childhood to be one of Earth's silent guardians, and she had never once set foot on the planet she was sworn to protect. That was the nature of their sacrifice, and she accepted it without complaint. Behind her, dozens of technicians worked at their stations, monitoring the vast network of sensors and probes that stretched across the galaxy like an invisible web. And every single one of them shared the same secret that had been passed down through generations of their families. Humanity was not what the galaxy believed it to be 3 centuries earlier. Human scientists had cracked the code of faster-than-light travel, and that discovery had changed everything. But not in the way anyone might have expected. The first ships to venture beyond the solar system had found a galaxy full of life. Thousands of species spread across millions of worlds, all united under something called the Galactic Council. And at first the leaders of Earth had felt hope and excitement at the thought of joining this vast community of intelligent beings. That hope had died quickly, and painfully, the observation teams had watched in horror as the Council's true nature revealed itself. For this was not a union of equals working together for the common good. This was an empire built on slavery and fear, and the systematic destruction of anyone who dared to resist. The 12 founding species of the Council had positioned themselves as gods among the stars, and every younger race that emerged was given the same choice: submit and serve, or be exterminated down to the last child. There was no third option, no negotiation, no appeal to mercy or justice. Elena had studied the records of what happened to species that refused, and those records still haunted her dreams. Entire worlds burned to ash. Billions of lives ended in fire and screaming. Civilizations that had existed for thousands of years erased from history as if they had never been. The Council called this process elevation, a twisted word for the theft of everything a species had ever been or could ever become. So humanity had made a different choice, a choice that required patience and discipline and sacrifice on a scale that no species had ever attempted. Before they chose to hide, the greatest minds on Earth came together and created something called the Veil Protocol, a masterpiece of deception that would make humanity invisible to the galaxy while they prepared for whatever future might come. To the Council's sensors and probes, Earth appeared as a primitive world populated by simple creatures who had barely discovered fire, let alone space travel. And this illusion was maintained with technology so advanced that the Council could not even imagine its existence. The real human civilization existed elsewhere, in places the Council would never think to look. They built cities inside hollowed asteroids and stations, hidden in the radiation storms of gas giants. They constructed shipyards in the hearts of dead stars and research facilities in pocket dimensions that existed outside normal space entirely. They spread across the galaxy like ghosts, always watching, always learning, always building, and they built weapons. Elena sometimes wondered if the founders had truly understood what they were creating when they authorized the military programs. But she suspected they had known exactly what they were doing and had done it anyway because they understood something fundamental about the nature of power. The only way to protect the innocent was to become strong enough that no one would dare threaten them. So humanity had spent 300 years becoming very strong indeed. The ships that filled their hidden shipyards were not like anything the Council had ever encountered. They moved through folds in reality itself, appearing and disappearing at will, and their weapons operated on principles of physics that the Council scientists had not yet discovered. The soldiers who crewed these vessels trained from birth in combat techniques that combined the best of every martial tradition humanity had ever developed, enhanced by technology that pushed the limits of what a human body could achieve, and the minds that coordinated it all. The strategists and planners and intelligence analysts had mapped every inch of Council space, learned every secret, identified every weakness. They knew the names of every Council leader, the locations of every military installation, the codes for every communication network. And they had been updating this information constantly for 3 centuries. All of this had been done in silence, without any species in the galaxy even suspecting that humanity existed as anything more than primitives playing with sticks and stones. Elena turned away from the window as an alert chimed on her console, and her heart rate increased slightly as she recognized a signal pattern. This was the one they had been watching for, the one they had known would come eventually. A Council exploration vessel had entered the solar system. She watched the data streaming across her screen as the alien ship approached Earth, its sensors scanning the planet below. And she knew exactly what those sensors would show. A world of 7 billion humans living in what appeared to be early industrial civilization, burning fossil fuels and fighting small wars, and completely unaware that they were not alone in the universe. The aliens would see cities and farms and primitive vehicles, and they would never suspect that 90% of what they observed was a carefully constructed illusion, maintained by technology hidden beneath the surface of every continent. The Council ship completed its scan and departed, no doubt racing back to report the discovery of yet another young species ripe for conquest. And Elena allowed herself a small smile that held no warmth. Let them come, she thought. Let them believe they have found easy prey. Let them threaten and demand imposture as they always do. She touched a control on her console and opened a channel to the commanders of Void Fleet, humanity's hidden armada, and she spoke the words that would begin the final phase of 300 years of preparation. The Council has found Earth, she said, her voice calm and steady despite the weight of what was about to unfold. Begin final readiness protocols and await further orders across the galaxy, in shipyards and stations and bases that the Council did not know existed. Millions of men and women received those words and understood their meaning. The waiting was almost over. Soon the galaxy would learn that humanity was not prey to be hunted, and Elena Vasquez would be the one to deliver that lesson in a way that no species would ever forget. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was a monument to arrogance built on the bones of 1,000 conquered worlds. And High Counselor Zorath Velkrin stood at its center like a god surveying his domain. His body was made of living crystal that pulsed with inner light, a form that his species considered the highest expression of biological evolution. And he looked down at the assembled representatives of the 12 founding races with the casual contempt of someone who had never known defeat. We have received a survey report from Exploration Fleet 7, he announced, his voice resonating through the chamber like bells ringing in a cathedral. A new species has been discovered in the outer spiral arm, a world called Earth populated by soft creatures who call themselves humans. A holographic image appeared in the center of the room, showing a blue and green planet turning slowly in the void. And the Council members leaned forward with the eager anticipation of predators catching the scent of wounded prey. They appear to be at early industrial development, Velkrin continued. Primitive combustion engines, basic electronic communication, simple projectile weapons. Nothing that could possibly threaten even our oldest vessels. Murmurs of satisfaction rippled through the assembly, and several council members were already calculating how many slaves could be harvested from a population of 7 billion. Representative Threx of the Mantoid Collective clicked his mandibles together in what passed for a smile among his kind, and his compound eyes glittered with greed as he studied the rotating image of Earth. "What resources does this world possess?" he asked, already imagining the profits that would flow to his species from this new acquisition standard variety. Valkyrin replied with a dismissive wave of his crystalline hand. "Water, metals, organic compounds, nothing exceptional. But the population density is quite high, which means abundant labor for our mining operations and factory worlds." The Council had perfected this process over millions of years, reducing the conquest and enslavement of entire civilizations to a simple formula that never varied. First came the discovery, then the demand for submission, then the inevitable crushing of any resistance, and finally the long, slow drain of everything valuable until only empty husks remained. They expected humanity to follow the same pattern as every other young species they had encountered. They were wrong, but they did not know that yet. "Our diplomats have made contact with the human leadership," Valkyrin said, and a trace of irritation entered his voice. "They have been offered standard protectorate status with all the usual terms, but they have refused to accept." A shocked silence fell over the chamber, for this was unusual. Most species surrendered immediately when they saw the size of the Council's fleets, and those few who hesitated usually capitulated after a demonstration of force. Against one of their smaller settlements, they claimed something called sovereignty, Valkyrin continued, his crystal form flickering with barely contained anger. "They speak of rights and independence and other primitive concepts, and they have demanded that we leave their system immediately." Representative Morvax of the reptilian hegemony let out a hissing laugh that echoed off the chamber walls, and his scaled face twisted into an expression of cruel amusement. "Demanded?" he repeated. "These hairless apes have demanded something of us." The laughter spread through the chamber as the council members shared their contempt for this tiny species that dared to defy them, and Valkyrin allowed the mockery to continue for several moments before raising his hand for silence. "I propose we send them a more direct message," he said, and his voice had taken on a cold edge that made even some of his fellow counselors shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Something that will make our position absolutely clear." He touched a control on his podium, and the image of Earth was replaced by a tactical display showing the positions of Council military forces in that sector of the galaxy. "We have 300 warships within strike distance of their world," Valkyrin said. "I recommend we inform the humans that they have one solar rotation to accept our terms, and if they refuse, we will reduce their population to a more manageable number." "How manageable?" asked Representative Cynthia of the Machine Collective, her artificial voice carrying no emotion but her optical sensors. Brightening with interest, 100,000 breeding specimens should be sufficient to maintain a viable labor pool, Valkyrin replied as casually as if he were discussing the weather. "The rest will be eliminated as a lesson to any other species that might consider defying our authority." The vote was unanimous, as it always was when the Council decided to make an example of a disobedient species. And within minutes, the ultimatum was transmitted to Earth on all frequencies. The message was designed to be heard by every human on the planet, a deliberate choice meant to spread panic and terror among the general population. The Council had learned long ago that frightened citizens often pressured their leaders into surrender before any shots were fired. "People of Earth," the transmission began, "you have been offered the protection of the Galactic Council, and you have foolishly refused. So hear now your fate. You have one rotation of your planet to accept our generous terms, and if you do not comply, our fleets will descend upon your world and cleanse it of all but 100,000 of your kind, who will serve us for the rest of their short lives." The message continued for several minutes, detailing exactly what the Council's weapons could do, and describing in graphic terms what would happen to those who resisted. And it ended with a final warning. Do not test our resolve. For we have destroyed 10,000 species before you, and we will destroy 10,000 more after you are gone. So submit and live, or defy us and die. The choice is yours. The council members settled back in their seats to wait, confident that the humans would be begging for mercy within hours. And Velkrin allowed himself to imagine the profits that would flow from this new conquest. He was still imagining those profits when a reply arrived from Earth. Exactly 17 minutes later, it was not a surrender. The transmission came from a human woman whose face appeared on the main display with an expression of perfect calm. And something about her steady gaze made several council members feel suddenly uncomfortable in ways they could not explain. This message is for the Galactic Council, she said. And her voice carried a weight of authority that seemed entirely inappropriate for a representative of a primitive species. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I speak for the people of Earth. Velkrin leaned forward, expecting to hear the familiar sounds of a defeated species attempting to negotiate better terms. But what came next was nothing like what he anticipated. You have threatened our world and our people, Elena continued. You have promised death and slavery and destruction, and you have done so in the belief that we are powerless to stop you. She paused, and something in her eyes shifted. Something cold and hard and utterly without fear. You have made an error, she said. This communication serves as your only warning. Stand down your forces, withdraw from our system, and abandon your plans for conquest. And if you do not, her voice dropped to barely more than a whisper, you will learn why humanity chose to remain hidden for 300 years. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Then the laughter began. Nervous at first, but growing louder as the councilors convinced themselves that this was nothing more than a bluff from a desperate species with no real power. Velkrin joined in the laughter even as something deep in his mind whispered that he had just made a terrible mistake. 7 minutes later, he would understand exactly how terrible that mistake had been. Elena Vasquez ended the transmission to the council and allowed herself exactly 3 seconds to feel the weight of what was about to happen before she pushed those feelings aside and became the weapon she had been trained to be around her. The command center of Station Omega-7 transformed from a quiet monitoring facility into the nerve center of the largest military operation in human history. And every screen and display came alive with data that would have been incomprehensible to anyone outside the highest levels of Void Command. They're laughing at us, reported Lieutenant Chun from his communications station, his voice tight with controlled anger as he monitored the council's internal frequencies. They think we're bluffing. Elena nodded slowly as she removed her civilian jacket and revealed the black uniform underneath. The same uniform worn by every member of Earth's hidden military, and the sight of it caused every technician in the room to straighten their spines and sharpen their focus. Let them laugh, she said, and her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had already seen how this story would end. Authorization code Prometheus 77 Alpha. Initiate final phase of the Veil Protocol. Those words traveled at the speed of light through hidden relay stations scattered across the galaxy, reaching every human installation, every ship, every soldier in a matter of moments, and the response was immediate. The veil began to fall. High Counselor Velkrin was still chuckling at the audacity of the human response when his tactical officer made a sound that no member of his species had ever made before. A high-pitched whine of pure terror that cut through the laughter like a knife. "High Counselor," the officer stammered, his crystalline form flickering with colors that indicated extreme distress. "Our sensors are detecting something impossible." "Impossible is not a word I accept," Velkrin snapped. But his irritation transformed into confusion as he looked at the tactical display. And then confusion became something very close to fear. Ships were appearing out of nowhere. Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands and then millions. Materializing from what seemed like empty space in every sector of Council territory simultaneously. And each one bore markings that the Council's databases had never recorded. They were human ships. How is this possible? Demanded Representative Thrax, his mandibles clicking frantically as he watched his homeworld's defense grid become surrounded by vessels that should not exist. The humans are primitives. They have no fleet. They have no technology. But the evidence on their screens told a different story, and that story was getting worse with every passing second. The human ships were not like anything the Council had ever encountered. They seemed to phase in and out of normal space at will, and their designs incorporated principles of engineering that the Council's best scientists could not even begin to understand. Some of them were massive, larger than anything in the Council's armada, and others were small and fast and moved in patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose, beyond simple automation, and they were everywhere. Elena watched the data flowing across her screens as humanity revealed itself to the galaxy, and she felt a fierce pride in what her species had accomplished during 3 centuries of silent preparation. Void Fleet reports all units in position, announced Commander Torres from the tactical station. We have complete coverage of every Council world, every military installation, every fleet position, time since transmission of our warning. Elena asked. 6 minutes and 43 seconds. She nodded and touched a control that opened a channel to the entire human military network. Millions of soldiers and sailors and pilots who had waited their entire lives for this moment. All units. This is Ambassador Vasquez speaking with the authority of the United Earth Government, she said, and her voice was broadcast to every human in the galaxy. Today, we end our silence. Today, we show the galaxy what we have become. Hold your positions and await further orders. Do not fire unless fired upon. Our purpose here is not destruction, but liberation. In the Council chamber, chaos had replaced the confident arrogance of moments before, and the 12 founders of the galactic government were screaming at their subordinates for explanations that no one could provide. How long have they been watching us? Valkyrin demanded, his crystal form now burning with the angry red of a species facing extinction. The answer came not from his officers, but from Elena herself, whose image suddenly appeared in the center of the Council chamber, as if she had walked through their security systems like they were made of paper. 300 years, she said, and several Council members flinched at the sound of her voice. We have been watching you for 300 years, studying your methods, learning your secrets, documenting your crimes. She began to walk slowly around the chamber, her holographic form passing through the seats of Council members who scrambled to get away from her. And her eyes held a cold fire that made even the most powerful beings in the galaxy want to hide. We saw what you did to the Volanthi, she continued, a peaceful species of artists and philosophers who wanted nothing more than to share their music with the universe. And you burned their world because they would not bow. Her voice grew hotter with each word, carrying the weight of every atrocity she had studied, every death she had witnessed through historical records, every child who had screamed as Council weapons fell from the sky. We saw what you did to the Moranthi, the Calaxians, the Silver Wind people, and 1,000 other species who trusted you and were betrayed. She stopped walking and stood directly in front of Valkyrin, her holographic eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his ancient heart beat faster than it had in centuries. We build our fleets not for conquest, but for this moment, she said. The moment when someone finally stood up to you and said no more. You cannot threaten the Council. Valkyrin shouted, but his voice cracked with fear that he could not hide. We have ruled this galaxy for millions of years. Your rule ended 7 minutes ago, Elena replied. And she raised her hand to gesture at the tactical displays that now showed human ships surrounding every council position. Look at your screens and tell me if you still believe you have any power here. The council members looked. And what they saw broke something inside them. Every fleet they commanded was surrounded. Every world they claimed was encircled. Every weapon they possessed was pointed at by human guns that were bigger and more numerous and more advanced than anything they had ever imagined. And the humans had not fired a single shot. We could destroy you, Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire chamber. Every founding species, every council world, every ship in your armada. We could end you in minutes, and there is absolutely nothing you could do to stop us. She let those words hang in the air. Let the council members feel the full weight of their helplessness. Let them understand for the first time in their long and bloody history what it felt like to be powerless. But we are not you, she said finally. And that is why you will live to face justice for what you have done. The 7 minutes that changed the galaxy were over. What came next would change it even more. What happened in the hours that followed was not a war, because a war requires two sides with at least some chance of victory. And the Galactic Council had no chance at all. High Counselor Velcrin made one final attempt to assert his authority, ordering every ship in the Council's vast armada to open fire on the human vessels that surrounded them. And for a brief moment, the galaxy blazed, with the light of 1,000,000 weapons discharging. Simultaneously, the human ships did not even try to dodge Elena, watched from her command center as Council weapons struck the hulls of Void Fleet vessels and splashed harmlessly against shields that operated on principles the Council could not comprehend. And she felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that 3 centuries of preparation had not been wasted. Damage report, she requested. Already knowing what the answer would be, no damage to any human vessel, Commander Torres replied. And there was wonder in his voice despite everything he had been trained to expect. Their weapons are simply not capable of penetrating our defensive systems. And our weapons? Elena asked. Torres pulled up a tactical analysis that showed exactly what human weapons could do to Council ships. And even Elena felt a chill run down her spine at the numbers displayed on her screen. We could destroy their entire fleet in approximately 4 minutes, Torres said quietly. There would be no survivors. Elena nodded and felt the weight of the power that humanity now wielded. A power that could end civilizations as easily as a child might crush an insect. And she understood why the founders of Void Command had built so many safeguards into their systems. This much strength required wisdom to control. And the absence of wisdom would make humanity no better than the monsters they had risen to oppose. Transmit the following to all Council forces, she ordered. You have fired upon us, and we have chosen not to respond in kind. This is your only demonstration of our restraint. Cease all hostile actions immediately, or we will be forced to defend ourselves. And you have seen that your weapons cannot harm us, while ours can end you. The response was immediate and total surrender. Council ships powering down their weapons and broadcasting distress signals as their crews struggled to process what had just happened to them. But surrender was only the beginning. Elena's holographic form still stood in the Council chamber, and the 12 founders of the galactic government sat frozen in their seats like children caught doing something terrible and waiting to learn their punishment. The Galactic Council is hereby dissolved, Elena announced, and her voice was broadcast to every world in known space simultaneously. Your authority is ended. Your fleets are disbanded. Your laws are void. And everything you have built on the suffering of others is finished. Velcrin found his voice at last, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. What will you do with us? He asked, and for the first time in his very long life, he sounded like what he truly was beneath all his power and arrogance. a frightened creature facing consequences for crimes. He had always believed he would never have to answer, for Elena considered the question carefully before she responded. "We have been watching you for 300 years, she said. "And in that time, we have documented every atrocity, every genocide, every act of cruelty committed by the Council and its member species." She waved her hand and thousands of images appeared around the chamber. Images of burning worlds and massacred populations and children being torn from their parents to be sold into slavery. We have recordings, testimonies, genetic evidence, and historical records that prove beyond any doubt the crimes you have committed, Elena continued. And we have identified every individual responsible, from the highest counselor to the lowest soldier who followed orders. The council members stared at the evidence of their crimes displayed around them, and some of them began to realize the full extent of what they were facing. "We could execute all of you right now," Elena said, "and no one in the galaxy would condemn us for it. Your own laws allowed for the extermination of entire species for lesser offenses than what you have done." She paused and looked at each of the 12 founders in turn, meeting their eyes with a gaze that held neither hatred nor mercy, but something far more terrifying, absolute certainty. "But that is not our way," she said. "Because if we simply killed you, we would become no better than what you are." And humanity did not spend 3 centuries preparing for this moment, just to become another empire of murderers and thieves. She turned and addressed not just the Council, but the entire galaxy. All the species who had suffered under Council rule and were now watching this moment with hope and fear and desperate uncertainty. The founding species of the Galactic Council will face trial, Elena announced, but not by human laws or human judges. You will be judged by the species you have wronged, by the survivors of the civilizations you tried to destroy, by the descendants of those you enslaved. That is not fair. Velkrin shouted, forgetting his fear in a surge of outrage. Those species hate us. They will show no mercy. Elena's expression did not change. You expected mercy from the species you were about to exterminate? She asked. You planned to kill 7 billion humans and enslave the survivors, and now you cry out for the fairness you never showed anyone else? She shook her head slowly, and something that might have been pity flickered briefly in her eyes before disappearing. Justice is not always comfortable for those who must face it, she said. But it is still justice, and you will receive more consideration than you ever gave to your victims. Over the following hours, human forces moved through Council space with a precision that bordered on supernatural. And everywhere they went, the same message was delivered. All slave populations were to be freed immediately. All military installations were to be surrendered. All council officials were to submit to detention pending investigation of their actions. There was resistance in some places. Council loyalists who could not accept that their galaxy-spanning empire had collapsed in minutes. But that resistance was short-lived and bloodless. Human ships would appear around any position that refused to surrender, their weapons powered and ready, and commanders would be given a simple choice. Lay down your arms and live, or fight and discover firsthand what human weapons could do. No one chose to fight twice. In the command center of Station Omega-7, Elena finally allowed herself to sit down, and she felt the exhaustion of the past few hours wash over her like a wave. Ambassador, said Lieutenant Chen quietly, we're receiving requests for communication from hundreds of species across the galaxy. They want to know what happens next. Elena nodded slowly, understanding that the hardest part of their mission was only beginning. Destroying the Council had been the work of minutes, but building something better to replace it would be the work of generations. Tell them that representatives of humanity will meet with any species that wishes to bows. Discuss the formation of a new galactic government, she said. One based on consent and cooperation rather than conquest and fear. She paused and looked at the stars visible through the observation window. The same stars she had watched her entire life from this hidden station. "Tell them that the age of empires is over," she said, "and the age of partnership is about to begin." The message went out, and across the galaxy, beings who had never known freedom began to hope for the first time. The council that had terrorized the stars for millions of years had ceased to exist in less than an hour, and humanity stood ready to help build something new from the ashes of the old. 1 year had passed since the day the Galactic Council fell. The universe had become a very different place. Elena Vasquez stood at the center of the Grand Assembly Hall on a space station that orbited no world but belonged equally to all of them. And she looked out at the gathered representatives of 3,000 species who had come together to witness the birth of something new. The hall had been built in the months following the council's collapse, a massive structure designed to hold delegates from every corner of the galaxy. And its architecture reflected the philosophy that had guided its creation. No single species sat higher than another. No one voice carried more weight than the rest. This was the first meeting of the Galactic Compact, and Elena had been chosen to deliver the opening address. 1 year ago, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber through technology that humanity now shared freely with all who asked for it. A threat was made against my world. The Galactic Council promised to kill billions of my people and enslave the survivors. And they made this threat because they believed we were weak and alone and helpless. She paused and let her gaze sweep across the assembly, seeing faces and forms of every description imaginable. Beings of crystal and flesh and metal and energy, all united by the simple fact that they had survived the Council's reign of terror. They were wrong about us, Elena continued. But their mistake taught us something important about ourselves. We learned that strength without wisdom is just another form of tyranny, and power without compassion is just another word for cruelty. She thought about the trials that had concluded just weeks before, where the 12 founding species of the Council had faced judgment for their crimes against the galaxy. The proceedings had been difficult, filled with testimony that made even hardened soldiers weep. But they had been fair in ways that the Council's own courts had never been. Some of the accused had been sentenced to imprisonment. Others had been condemned to spend the rest of their lives working to rebuild what they had destroyed. A few had been executed for crimes so terrible that no other punishment seemed adequate, and some had been acquitted. Individuals who had worked within the system to save lives and protect the innocent, often at great personal risk, justice had been served. Imperfect and painful, but genuine in ways that mattered. Humanity could have chosen to become the new rulers of this galaxy, Elena said. We had the power to do so, and there are those who would have welcomed us as saviors if we had claimed that throne. She shook her head slowly. But we did not hide for 3 centuries and build our strength, just so we could become another empire. We did it so that no one would ever have to fear another council, another threat of extinction, another demand for submission. She raised her hand and the lights in the chamber dimmed as a holographic display activated above the assembly, showing a map of the galaxy with thousands of colored points representing every world that had joined the compact. This is what we built instead, she said. A union of equals where every species has a voice and every world has sovereignty, where disputes are settled through dialogue rather than destruction, where the strong protect the weak instead of preying upon them. The display changed, showing images of the past year's accomplishments, former slave populations, building new lives on worlds they could now call their own. Reconstruction efforts turning devastated planets into gardens. Schools where children of 100 different species learn together in peace. We have accomplished much in 1 year, Elena acknowledged, but we are just beginning. There are still worlds in need, still wounds to heal, still injustices to correct. She looked directly at the human delegates who sat among the assembly. scattered throughout rather than gathered in a single powerful block. And she felt proud of the choice her species had made after revealing their true strength to the galaxy. Humanity had chosen to step back rather than step forward into leadership. The vast majority of human military forces had withdrawn to the edges of known space, maintaining a watchful presence but not an occupying one. Human technology was being shared rather than hoarded. Human representatives participated in the compact as equals rather than rulers, and in the quiet spaces between stars. The hidden stations and shipyards still operated, still watched, still stood ready to respond if the peace they had helped create was ever threatened. Elena hoped they would never need to reveal themselves again. But she knew that hope alone was not enough. Humanity will remain a part of this compact for as long as it exists, she said, but we will not lead it. That responsibility belongs to all of you, working together as partners rather than subjects. She smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed her face from that of a diplomat into something much more human. We have given you our protection, but what you do with your freedom is your choice. We believe that every species, when given the chance, will reach for the stars with wonder rather than greed, with curiosity rather than conquest. The assembly hall erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very walls. And beings who had been enemies for millennia embraced as friends, while former slaves wept with joy at words they had never expected to hear. Elena stepped back from the podium and allowed herself to feel the moment, knowing that this was why she had been born, why her parents and grandparents and great-grandparents had sacrificed so much. They had given their lives to a cause they might never see fulfilled. And now she stood in the fulfillment of their dreams. Later that evening, after the ceremonies had ended and the delegates had returned to their quarters to rest and celebrate, Elena made her way to a small observation deck at the edge of the station. She stood alone before the vast window, watching the stars turn slowly past, and she thought about everything that had led to this moment. A soft chime announced a communication request, and she touched a control on her wrist to accept it. Ambassador Vasquez, said a familiar voice. Admiral Chun reporting from Station Omega 7. Elena smiled at the promotion. The young lieutenant who had monitored Council communications on the day of the revelation had proven himself capable of much greater responsibilities. Report. Admiral, she said. All quiet on all fronts, Chen replied. Void Fleet remains at full readiness. Our monitoring networks show no signs of any species preparing aggressive action against another. The peace is holding. And the other matter? Elena asked quietly. There was a pause before Chun responded. We have identified 17 species currently enslaved by civilizations outside the former Council's territory, he said. And our analysts are preparing recommendations for how we might assist in their liberation. Elena nodded slowly. Feeling the weight of the work that still remained, the Council had been destroyed. But they were not the only predators in the galaxy. And there were still countless beings suffering under the rule of tyrants, who had never heard of Earth or humanity. Continue your preparations, she ordered. And remember our principles. We act only when asked or when the innocent face extinction. We use the minimum force necessary. We do not conquer, we liberate. Understood, Ambassador, Chen replied. And Ambassador? Thank you for everything you have done. My grandmother was among those who first designed the Veil Protocol, and I know she would be proud to see what we have become. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, an unusual emotion for someone who had trained herself to remain composed in any situation. Thank her for me, she said softly, and tell her that her work made all of this possible. The communication ended, and Elena returned her gaze to the stars, somewhere out there, hidden in the spaces between worlds. Humanity's secret strength remained ready to answer any threat, and somewhere out there, beings who had never known freedom were waiting for someone to help them. The story of humanity's emergence from hiding had ended. But their story as guardians of the galaxy was only beginning. Elena Vasquez watched the stars and smiled, knowing that whatever challenges the future might bring, her species would face them as they have faced everything else, with patience and preparation and an unwavering commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The galaxy had learned a lesson on the day humanity revealed itself. A lesson about underestimating the quiet ones who watched from the shadows and somewhere in the archives of Void Command. A file remained open, listing every injustice in the galaxy that still needed to be answered, every tyrant who still needed to be stopped, every innocent life that still needed to be saved. Humanity's work would never truly be finished. But that was exactly as it should be, because the moment they stopped reaching out to help others would be the moment they became no better than the council they had overthrown. The stars burned cold and bright in the endless darkness, and humanity watched over them all, silent guardians of a galaxy finally learning to be free.